Good morning, you guys. Just an FYI, we're not going to have a warm up this morning. We took care of those last week, and we won't get your test. You won't get your test back today, because again, we changed our schedule based on some lessons last week. So you'll get those back tomorrow when I'm back in the classroom. So today our goal is going to be writing some equations. So you're going to actually read a sentence and write a mathematical equation from it, and then actually we're going to go back the other direction as well, where you're going to take an equation and you're going to write it into a sentence. So first thing, let's take a look at some vocabulary words. An equation. We've used that word all the time, but let's make sure you actually know what it means. It's a statement that the values of two mathematical expressions are equal, and it's indicated by the equal sign. And that's not supposed to be a smiley face there. It's supposed to be equals and then the end parentheses. So sometimes you guys use the word equation when really it's not an equation because it's just an expression because there's no equal sign. So it's only an equation if you actually see an equal sign. An equivalent equation then are equations that have the same values for the same variables. And they're equivalent because again they're equal to each other. So let's figure out, how do I translate a sentence into an actual math equation? The first step that we need to do is we need to identify the unknown variable. This will be represented by the sentence either telling you what the letter is, or it'll say a number, a variable. So it'll be something that'll tell you that this is what we don't know in our equation. Then what we're going to look for is we're going to look for some keywords. And these keywords that we're going to look for are something like is, as much as, is the same as, is identical to. These words here are going to tell you where to put that equal sign. Then anything that comes in front of the equal sign is the first part of the equation. Anything that comes after the equal sign is the second part of your equation. Along with these keywords, you're going to be wanting to think about words like product, quotient, sum, total. Those words that we talked about earlier in the school year to help us write our expressions. We're going to use those same things with writing our equation. In all honesty, you guys, the only new thing today is you're looking for these keywords, because these keywords are going to tell you where to put the equal sign. Is your big one, and that's what you see most often. So let's take a look at our first example. What we're going to be doing is translating this sentence into an equation. So let's go through our steps. Our first step tells us to look for the unknown. So we're going to read it, and when we come to that unknown, we're going to underline it. So it says a number B. Oh, there's a letter. That's part of our unknown. Divided by 3 is 6 less than C. Oh, there's another letter. That's our other unknown. Part 2 then says, look for that keyword that's going to tell you where the equal sign is. Hopefully, you can see is right here. That means that's where our equal sign goes. The text that comes before it is going to go in front of our equal sign, and the text that comes after is going to come after the equal sign. So let's just look at this first part of the text. A number B divided by 3. So I'm going to take B, divide by 3. Then we get to our is sign, or is keyword. So that means I'm done with the first part of my equation, and we're going to move to the back side. Then this says 6 less than C. Hopefully you're remembering this than is a really, really important word, because remember that tells you switch the order. Normally we write things in the way that we read it from left to right, but this than tells us that we switch things around. So instead of the 6 coming first, we have to put the C. So this will be C minus 6. So here is our text translated into an equation. There are different letters, and that can happen depending on how the equation is written. It's still an equation. We're just using different variables. So it's not technically an equivalent equation like we defined it because we have different variables. But it's still an equation. Let's look at another one. So this one says 15 more than z, oh, I see a letter, times 6 is, oh, there's a keyword for me. That's going to tell me my equal sign goes there. Is 11 less than y times 2? So I underline y. There's our other variable, or unknown, I should say. The part that comes before our is our first part of our sentence, or equation, I should say. So 15 more than. Now, this one does have the word than, but it's okay because it doesn't have less in front of it, so you can still put 15. More means plus z times 6. I will show you another way to write this that some students will do, but this is how I find most students will write that first part. Then it says 11 less than y. Whoops, I have a keyword of than that has less in front of it, so this stuff that comes after goes first. So I'm going to do y times 2 minus 11. And this is a multiplication. So how I have this written is how I see most students will write it. Some students know that typically when we put a letter and a number together, that normally we'll put the number first. So if you were to write it like this, that's perfectly fine. It's going to mean the same thing. It's just your preference with the letters and the numbers, which one comes first. I don't care, as long as it still follows the rule on what's being said there. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this one. So 2 plus the quotient of a number. So this time it says a number for our unknown. That means we get to choose whatever letter we want for it. I'm just going to choose N for it. And 8 is, that's where my equal sign is going to go, the same as 16. And actually the whole keyword is the same as, but you guys are going to see the word is, and you're going to think of the equal sign at that point. All right, so let's go ahead and write our equation. So I'm going to read the text as I read it. I'm going to write what it means mathematically. All right, so I read 2 plus, so that means 2 adding the quotient. Quotient is a word that some students struggle with. It means division, so n divided by 8. So the quotient of a number n and 8. So when it says the quotient, what comes next? Those two things are what are being divided. And then it says is the same as, the only thing on that other side is the number 16. A lot of equations that we work with only are equal to a number on the other side. So don't panic at all when it's just a number on that side. Let's take a look at example D. 27 times k, so there we have a letter, is, there's our keyword, h, another letter, squared, decreased by 9. So we've identified our unknowns, we've identified our equal sign. Let's write it. 27 times k. You can choose to put the multiplication dot in there if you want. You don't have to. Is, so now I'm moving on to the next part. H squared. So remember, squared means that you have that little exponent with a 2. Decreased by means minus 9. So here's our equation. Quick thing, if this had cubed in it instead of squared, it's still going to be raised to a power. Remember, cubed is to the power of 3. So the second part that we're going to take a look at are rules and formulas. A rule is for a relationship between two quantities. It's actually called a formula. You guys have worked with formulas for a while. Last year when we talked about area and circumference of circles, area and perimeter for rectangles and triangles, and any other shapes that we worked with. Those are called formulas because no matter which rectangle I'm working with, the formula will always work to allow me to find the area. These formulas are actually an equation. They just call them a formula because it will work for any rectangle that we work with. So sometimes when you're reading the statements, it's actually going to ask you to write a formula, but when you see that, it's still asking you to write an equation. It's kind of like last week when we talked about functions and equations. They mean the same thing. Formulas and equations are the same thing. They're synonyms of each other. All right, let's take a look at our first example. We're going to translate this sentence into a formula. Some of you may have started to look ahead at this problem, and you'll notice that there's no is in this problem for a keyword, but we do see the word equals. So that's going to be our keyword for the equal sign. What comes before it talks about the perimeter of a square. And when we talk about perimeter, we usually use the letter P. If you were to use a different one in here, that's fine. I'm pretty sure in the homework I tell you the perimeter P of a square equals. So I'll tell you which letter to use. So P equals, and then it says 4 times the length of a side. And we don't know the length of that side, so we're going to say 4 times S. So there is our formula for perimeter for a square. Most of the formulas that you guys are going to be writing, just so you know, are formulas that you've seen before. So hopefully that'll help you with writing them to make it a little bit easier too. All right, looking at this next one. You may not have seen this formula before. You've probably seen it in a textbook or on some kind of standardized test. So this will kind of be a little bit new for you, but we'll get to it later this school year and into next year. So this one, it says, in a right triangle, the square of the measure of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares of the measure of the legs, A and B. So, holy buckets, that's a lot to think about. But let's just read it up until the is equal to. So it says in a right triangle, giving it the shape that we're working with. The square, so this tells you you're going to have something to the little power of 2 of the measure of the hypotenuse C. So C is our variable. So we're going to have C squared, then is equal to the sum of the squares, I'm going to have another little square here, of the measure of its legs, A and B. Here are the letters. And previously I forgot to underline it, but it said sum. So we're going to add A plus B, but then it talks about the squares of the measure. So I have to square both of these. Now, this one I will totally get it. Some of you guys are going to be like, huh? This is a tricky one. I totally get it. There's really nothing like this tricky on the homework or anything. But this is a formula, just so you know, you're going to be using all the time in geometry next year. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. This is what you're going to use all the time to find some missing lengths of some right triangles. Okay? All right, the very last thing that we're going to take a look at, this part is actually the easiest, where you're actually going to write an equation, or have an equation, and put it into a sentence. The nice thing about this is that how you would read it, like how you would say it to me, is exactly how you're going to write it. Now I noticed on this one, for some reason, and I don't know if it's on yours, but my x and my 2 are kind of overlapping each other. But that should be 12 minus 2x there. So as we read this, we're going to write it exactly as you would read it. So you would say 12, and we're going to spell out the words, each word. So 12 minus 2 times, you could say a number. Most students will say times x is negative 5. Oops, that's negative. So you just took that equation and wrote it into a sentence. Another thing some students will do instead of is, they'll put equals that's fine. That means the same thing. People would still know that's an equal sign there. So here's what you would end up for that equation. Let's look at the next one. So this next one, you would read this to me saying a squared. Again, you're writing out every part. So you're not going to put a little 2. You're actually going to write out a squared plus 3 times b and for this one, I'll put equals because a lot of you guys will say equals. C. Some students will put over 6. Technically, this one is C divided by 6. But if you were to put over 6, I can't mark that wrong because that would still get you to the right equation as well, or the right sentence. So questions on those two. Help each other out if you do. I want you guys to go ahead and try these last two for me. Press pause, and then once everyone's done, press play, see if we come up with the same thing. All right, on C, you should end up with something like 15 is, or 15 equals, 25 times x squared plus 2. Real quick, just so you guys know, if you were to spell a word wrong, like if you spell 25 wrong, or times, or squared, whatever it is, as long as I can still recognize the word, it's fine. Last year, most of my students, instead of handwriting it, they typed it. Then they could use kind of that autocorrect to help them make sure they're spelling things correctly, which is perfectly fine. On example D, a couple ways you could write this. You could say 3/2, 3/2. Both of those are perfectly fine. Minus t cubed. I put equals this time for this one, and then 132. This part here hopefully should be a lot easier than the first part, but it's still what you read is exactly what you're going to write for the first part, and here what you see in the math text is what you're going to write. So you guys have the rest of the hour to work on the writing equations worksheet. When you're done with it, make sure you submit that to Schoology. If you don't get it done in class, finish it for class time tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you tomorrow.